Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where it is you are listening. I'm Dan Turchin, InsightFinder CEO. Thrilled to be hosting today's panel discussion. Thanks for joining us for a glimpse into the minds of two technology leaders who have made AI a cornerstone of their growth plans. I'll introduce our experts shortly, but first, just thought I'd share some perspective to whet the palate. We'll orient today's discussion around four key themes. Why does ITOps matter? I know it seems like a basic question, but still worth revisiting. Where have we been in the ITOps space? Where are we now? And of course, where are we headed? You might have noticed the world's changing a bit. Over the past 9 months, digital services have just been crushed under the weight of new demand. As one example, Shopify, the e-commerce backend and I guess we'll say Wall Street darling, has experienced 600% growth in merchants just in 2020. We're not just buying everything online these days, but we're dependent on broadband for everything, and we're buying more hardware to connect it all. iPad sales, for example, have increased 31% since February, and Dell has sold 25% more laptops to the education market since February. It should come as no surprise that downtime is more expensive than ever, often exceeding $10,000 a minute or more. IT leaders who are thinking in a progressive way are using these times to accelerate digital transformation initiatives by 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. You might have heard the CEO of Zoom, Eric Yuan, went on the record. He said, you know what, this is exactly the traffic that we designed this company to support in 2030. So it's about 10 years ahead of schedule. Hans Vestberg, the outspoken CEO of Verizon, says the average daily mobile phone call volume has eclipsed 800 million, which might or might not sound like a big number until you consider that that's the average daily call volume for Mother's Day, which is the peak of each year. Well, that's the average daily volume now. Apps are being tested at scale. You'll hear about one of them being tested at scale today. Networks are at full capacity. Web servers, load balancers, switches, and routers are working overtime and generating a volume of logs and metrics that would have crushed pre-cloud architectures. We'll hear a lot about the future of cloud architectures from our other guests today. That's why everyone responsible for keeping the lights on has been forced to look at new technology to observe and manage infrastructure as it is forced to scale. For most of us, that means AI-first systems of intelligence are becoming a necessity. Anomaly detection and incident prediction are replacing the old way. The way we used to watch lights blinking in a knock, doesn't work anymore. As Liz Holland from Dell shared with us during last month's panel discussion, this is an actual example. Their hardware monitoring strategy used to involve sending the interns to the basement to literally write down which servers were running. Now that Dell uses AI, they're doing a little bit better. In fact, Liz shared that in March, they moved 140,000 global employees to home offices over a weekend. Pretty impressive. Today, you'll hear from two of the best minds in the business about what it means to think AI first when you're designing your monitoring strategy. We hope the next 30 minutes will change your career. There's never been a better time to be doing what it is that you do. With that said, let's go ahead and meet the panelists. So proud to introduce you to two of my friends, two leaders in this space. Sean Barker, CEO of cloudEQ. Let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background, Sean.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you inviting me to participate. I've been in IT for about 30 years. I've been an executive in Fortune 100 companies for, I'd say, 2/3 of that time. Then went into consulting, but during that time it was healthcare, retail, wholesale, entertainment, finance. A broad breadth of companies that I had the pleasure of working for and participating in. But then I went back into consulting and thought we could do it better, and started a company that does all of that sort of stuff. We do professional services, managed services, and application development, with offices in the U.S. as well as in India, of course. But we're just consulting to the larger enterprise kinds of clients, because we understand not only the technology but the politics of what can go into that. And that, as you know, can be pretty challenging in some cases.
Sean, good to have you on the panel. Next up,
Thank you.
Mike Sao Pedro, who's the founder and CTO of Apprendis, maker of the app that supports remote learning that my kids love, InsightFinder. Mike, welcome to the panel. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dan. And Sean, it's nice to see your face officially. So yeah, I am CTO and co-founder of a company that makes online labs. So if you remember being in high school, middle school, doing labs in a science classroom, well, we've turned all of those online. And the magic of these labs is that they are capable of automatically grading themselves and giving students feedback based on what they do in real time that helps them learn and get better. We also have a dashboard that gives teachers insights into where their kids are struggling as kids are working. My background is actually originally was computer science, but I have a degree in learning sciences as well. And this company is spun out of some of the dissertation research that I worked on with my advisor. So it's very rare in life you get the opportunity to take something from an idea that didn't even exist and turn it into something that could potentially scale to millions of students. Back in the day, I was a senior software engineer for a defense contractor, and I worked artificial intelligence planning and scheduling problems.
Mike, you and I were talking offline about the challenge of having your day job relate to really innovating, building great software, but also being responsible for infrastructure. What do you think most people who haven't been responsible for keeping the lights on just don't appreciate about the complexity of managing ITOps?
I think they think that it's easy, that it's something that you either do or you don't do. You're either doing it right or you're wrong. It's a 1 and 0. And the reality is that anything can go wrong, and there's a myriad. Myriad is probably an understatement of ways that things could go wrong. And especially if you're a smaller startup like we are, there's always this trade-off between should I be developing new features and doing things to support and grow my user base versus making my infrastructure as scalable as possible. So, right, there's always this trade-off between how should we be spending our time between, planning for 5 million users when we don't have 5 million users yet, versus making those features and making those things that are going to draw in the crowd so that you have that user base.
Yeah, makes sense. Sean, you and I met through your work at a large global QSR, quick service restaurant chain. What do you think it is that, let's say, a consumer of the cloud services that you deliver doesn't appreciate about the complexity of what it is you and your team do?
I think Mike has it right. I mean, it's really, they think it's easy, right? It's very, very simple, and it should just work. With the proliferation of technology and Apple services and Microsoft services, you end up with everything being accessible all the time. So people come to view it as a utility. Just like you come home, you turn on the light switch, you expect the power to work, and you're only frustrated when it doesn't, and then that is not acceptable, right? So there's a lot of people in the background at Microsoft and Amazon and Apple and the like, keeping those lights on, and it's very, very challenging. I don't know if I'm sure many of you experienced the Office 365 outage the other day, where you just simply couldn't log in, and if your IDs or identities are tied to that Office 365 outage, you not only couldn't get into email, but you also couldn't get into a lot of other things that you do that were completely up and running, but authentication wasn't working. So Microsoft got a little bit of a black eye on that one, I'm sure, and we're updating the status on Twitter because there was no other place to update it because nobody could log in and see it. So it's got to be, we've got to make it and continue to make it a utility. And you show up, you turn on the lights, and the lights come on. So there's just a lot of it's kind of like a duck running across the lake. It moves across the lake, but you don't see all the feet underneath churning to move that duck. So yeah, I think that's underappreciated.
We've all had our Microsoft moments. Curious for both of you, describe your most recent outage experience and what did you learn? Maybe there's a lesson in there that some of our audience members can learn from.
Sure, I can kick this one off. So being in educational technology and being a smaller startup, we had decided around late March that because of COVID, we would offer our services for free for the remainder of the year. When we had an internal discussion about the potential of not being able to scale to meet those needs given where our infrastructure was, and we decided it was worth the risk. About 3 weeks in, we had more, by a multiplicative factor, more users than we ever had before. And one day, it just went down. And what I mean by down is that the server got so unhealthy that the auto scaling groups that we had kept shutting down and restarting, all kinds of memory errors, and nothing was coming clear about what the actual problem was. And it took about an hour or so to triage what actually happened and trace it. And it turned out to be, it had to do with our backend logging infrastructure connecting to a WebSocket server that was bottlenecking the system. And so what we actually had to do is shut down that component. And that got us back to a stable state. But then we spent the next couple of weeks essentially building a new data pipeline flow to make sure that the WebSocket server could get the information in a better way rather than the bottleneck that we had. I would say that was my first real major real time. I need to get this done because the users are going crazy and getting really upset, and I'm the guy that's fully responsible for this. So it's me and my team, and we've got to figure this out. So I learned about the panic that can ensue when something fails hardcore, and live through it. And through this, I've learned ways and lessons learned about ways that you can make your system more scalable, and some of the infrastructure challenges that you might find along the way that you didn't expect. I think that's one of the biggest lessons, is that things can go wrong in ways that you expect, but the worst is when they go wrong in ways that you don't expect. And how do you deal with it and bounce back from it?
Panic is such a good adjective.
Yes.
Sometimes we forget it's a human pursuit, and we care deeply about the quality of service for the end user. Sean, I'm sure you have a little bit of a different perspective based on just the scale of the services you support, but I'm sure you also have an outage story. What's yours?
Oh, I've got 20, 25, almost 30 years of outage stories, but I'd say recently we were involved in a large engagement program managing a transition between one ITO outsourcer and another ITO outsourcer, which involved moving of 3 global data centers and transitioning everything and every service that they had. We ran into a number of outages, kind of during that problem. In one particular case, we moved a data center in another part of the world, and everything was working fine. Everybody tested out. Everything was absolutely perfect. So we all went home and began to celebrate the big win that we had. And 6 hours later, the entire data center crashed, and we didn't know why. So, in the traditional sense of doing traditional operations, you get everybody on a call, you determine what changed is the first question, what changed? And then, what are my 2 to 5 ways of restoring service as quickly as possible? Then is that a permanent fix? What's the root cause? How do we prevent this from happening in the future? Turns out it was just a misconfiguration on the storage platform for VMware, and VMware, when it runs out of space, goes down. But they configured the size of the storage to the size of VMware, so it had nowhere to go. So we had to physically get on the phone with the back-end level 3 engineers at the storage manufacturer and figure out how to move block storage from one tier to another, which took about 4 hours. But if we had AI or some analytics that would have given us better information earlier on, we could have prevented the outage, right?
Yeah, Sean, I'd like to dovetail off of what you just said. That's sometimes, right, the errors that you see, right, are symptomatic, but Where
Right.
is that? What is the root cause? And the symptoms that you see might be completely unrelated to what's actually happening and going wrong. And something else that you said that's pretty funny too is that, oh, it was a misconfiguration thing. I'm not sure who's in the audience, if there's IT professionals or less techie people, but the IT professionals can definitely relate to this. How many millions of knobs could you possibly twiddle to fix the problem, right? And which one is it? Uh, I recently had an experience where we were connecting, we just connected ourselves to the RDS proxy to improve our database flow. And we had an issue with database pinning where queries were getting stuck. So we weren't actually getting the performance benefits that we hoped. It took about a month of going back and forth with Amazon and us trying different things. And eventually what we figured out that it actually wasn't, it wasn't a configuration thing, it was a code level thing where we had set a flag incorrectly. So literally the light switch of a true to a false that made everything work correctly. And it turned out that the documentation wasn't as clear as it could be. And it took a group of people to figure this out, that it was literally a bit. It came down to a bit between the level of scale. And how many bits are there that you could possibly tweak to get huge gains in performance that you know about or that you don't know about, and why?
No, absolutely. It's you know, when you start changing things to try to resolve things, you can make it far worse. So yeah, and there's a lot of knobs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of knobs.
More every day.
Yes.
So two-part question. Since the pandemic began, first off, how has life changed for you personally? And then equally or maybe less important, how has demand for your services changed?
Well, I mean, I can start here, Mike. At least for me, the hours get longer, right? So I already work a ton. I get up at 4 a.m. and I go to bed late at night, but the hours of communicating with people get longer because you can't go tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, can you help me with this? Or could you do this for me? You have to schedule a meeting and find their time, and you don't want to disrupt their dinner or their kids or their, you know, all of the rest of the stuff. So that becomes a bit challenging. I have 4 children, but they're all off in college, so I don't have those particular problems. But other people do, are in different stages of their lives. But I'd say that the hours getting longer. I still travel. I don't travel nearly what I used to travel, but I still do get on an airplane and go. But I can't. I obviously can't visit customers who aren't in their offices, who don't want to go out and spend time. So that's been a bit of a challenge. And then I'd say from a business perspective, I've had a few. We've got a few clients where business has dropped off, and they fall into kind of 2 categories. One is protect their revenue and just hang on and cut everything they can cut and wait. And the other, more liquid clients or clients that have the capital, reinvest and double down and try to accelerate everything that they're doing within the confines of the projects that we're doing with them, or the managed services that we're doing with. We try to find better, more ways to move forward in things that we were going to do next year. Maybe we're pulling them into this year. So it's been a kind of good and bad, but it depends on the industry you're serving and how it's been affected by COVID.
Like, what about you? You talked a little bit about the increased demand for inkets. How
Yeah.
has that affected you both personally, and how have you managed to deliver the same quality of service with the same resources, but much higher demand?
That's a great question. I didn't have much of a life to begin with being a co-founder, and I would say that it's probably taken even more of my life away. But personally, I'm okay. I'm okay with that because this is what I dreamed about happening, right? I wanted more kids and more teachers to be exposed to this kind of software and this way of, in sort of helping, grow science education in a unique way. So, it's about seizing the moments. So it's totally worth it for me, and I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. But I would say that, yeah, because of COVID, right, schools have gone either fully remote or a hybrid situation where some kids are in school some days of the week and other days they're working from home remotely. And so because of that, we've seen multiplicative volumes of the number of users we have and paying customers. So it's been really exciting, to say the least. I would say that internally, because of COVID, the focus on scalability has become much more. It's become much more of a big focus right now, right? Because we know that there's going to be more demand coming. So my development team, we just decide to set aside the time now and just focus exclusively on scalability for a month or a month and a half, 2 months, right? And because of that, we were able to meet the demand that we have this month now without any hiccups, because we put the time in ahead. We put it in ahead of time, the work. So I guess from a strategic standpoint is that we had some sort of external motivator for us to become proactive as opposed to reactive to scaling, and that is helping us prepare for the future. But that said, it's a job that's never going to be done, right? Again, the scalability is not a binary. We're going to get to scale to a certain point, and then we're going to have to revisit this all again.
Yeah, I
It's
think
an amazing
Mike,
journey. I've told you and Janice, your CEO and co-founder, just how genuinely proud we are at InsightFinder to be supporting your mission. You know, I have a personal connection to it. Like I mentioned, you know, we use the InKits labs to help with our kids' education. So just really proud, and I know how real it is. I know, you know, a lot of the audience may not appreciate just your level of commitment, and so kudos to you and the team. One of the things that we had promised the audience is that we'd share some tips from the pros, and so kind of roll back the clock to that last outage you described, or you know, other kinds of maybe recent ITOps incidents. Talk us through the kind of your organization's best practices when it comes to triaging incidents.
Well, I mean, at least from my perspective, I think that we're kind of blessed and cursed at the same time, because we have more information than we've ever had before, and at the same time, that produces a lot of noise, right? So it's really discerning how you get through that information and finding relevant content. So as you grab telemetry data and put it somewhere and analyze that data to figure out what's wrong or what's broken, you still have a lot of the same processes of get everybody on the phone and start to triage the problem, but we're looking at different indicators, you know, kind of going forward, and those are going to continue to evolve and change as we get better about auto remediation and some of the things you can do with the platforms that are either out there or are coming out there to be able to put AI ops, you know, fully in. The dream of AI ops is all in, everything just works, but it's probably never going to be that simple. But you know, the basic stuff is still the same, which is get everybody on the phone and figure out what changed, and look at the data and validate it, and go pick 2 to 5 ways that you can restore service and pursue all of them in parallel.
Mike, best practices?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to address this a little bit more maybe from the product perspective as opposed to exclusively the IT operations. And I mean, they technically too, for my role, and we have a small scrappy team, right, is that the two get blended no matter what, because we're small. So there's basically 4 ways we get notified of issues. So one is through customer reports. And we get them in 3 ways. We get them through email. We have a small customer service team that teachers and students can call if they need. And we also have recently integrated with a tool called Help Scout, which provides a little icon in the corner, a little question mark that teachers can type in what particular problems they're having, and it comes up with some automated responses, so things that we've populated about the system, right? So that helps take a lot of the burden off and gets answers to our customers much more quickly than having like a large team of people ready to call. On the infrastructure side, we have CloudWatch alarms set. So if there's anybody in the audience who doesn't know this, we use Amazon Web Services, and one of the nice features of Amazon Web Services is that you can post all kinds of metrics about your servers to this service called CloudWatch, which lets you monitor the health of your systems for, so like memory, amount of traffic coming in and out, and you can set these alarms to say, hey, are you exceeding these thresholds or not? So for example, if you're blowing through 50% of the memory on one of your servers, right, you probably want to know about that because it's likely that something bad's going to happen. We also do regular testing across platforms, and we have our unit tests set up. And we also do regular development and testing for new features, making sure old ones work. And so our developers always act as testers as well. And we mix and match as part of our code reviews that someone who didn't code the feature, somebody else tests it. When we actually have a problem, whether it be a particular software problem or an outage, we determine there's basically 3 levels of severity. So is it something that's affecting a large number of users, like a core piece of functionality? Is it something that's reported by a small number of users that could potentially have large impact? Or is it something reported by a small number of users with local impacts, right? If it's the number one, where it's a large number and a core piece of functionality, like the day that the server blew up, right, it's a fire alarm. Everybody stops what they're doing and we try to fix it as fast as possible. If it's the second, where it's a little bit less severe but it could have potential impact, we try to recreate the problem based on the feedback that we got from customer service or what the email has said to us. And then we divide and conquer, and we try to get a fix out within 24 hours. And if it's the third one, we try to get as much info as possible, but then we try to work it into our next development cycle, so like regular 2-week spirals. And then at the end of it, we make sure to document where the fix happened and comment on how we fixed it so that we have some log record of it, right? Because it's usually one of those things that if it's something really crazy, right, it's institutional knowledge that we'll want to be able to share amongst all our developers as we grow. And yeah, and make sure that everybody's in the loop about what happened and why.
Sean, you used a good analogy about ITOps and infrastructure being kind of like utility, that kind of reliability. But occasionally you'll get a request from the business or from a client that is unreasonable because of some kind of technology limitation with regard to infrastructure. Describe any examples of where you've received a request and you've actually had to push back on it for lack of the ability of the infrastructure to support it.
Yeah, from requests fall into, to your point, 2 buckets, right? There is I want to do something, and then you branch that out into, is that technically possible, or can we do it with the resources and the time and the money and the rest of the items we have? We rarely say no, because that's just never good business. But we do in that particular instance, if it's technically possible, but there are other limitations, we ask the client to help prioritize, or it's usually a matter of time, money, people, effort to get something done. And oftentimes the client will say, I want to do a proof of concept around this, that, or the other thing. And we've simply said, we can do that, but either we take this off the table, or we go bring on 12 more people and it's going to cost X, and let them make that decision. In the instance where it's just not technically possible, I think in most cases it's almost always technically possible. Then the question becomes, not can I, but should I? And then we go back to the client and say, I realize that you want this, or you think you want this, but you probably don't for these reasons, right? And from there we'll educate them on the reasons why that's not an effective approach to go after the solution that they're trying to solve, or the problem they're trying to solve, but rather present them with 3 or 4 other opportunities to solve the same problem. And then we go back to money and time and people, right? I have come across 1 or 2 where it just couldn't be done physically or technologically, but it's pretty rare, and it's usually the client, in some cases, wants something that they just don't understand that they really want, and they want a solution to a problem that they don't actually understand. But they know what their problems are most of the time, and they just want the pain to stop, or the feature to release, or the benefit to come. Make sense?
Absolutely. Mike, same question to you.
Yeah, I agree with Sean. I'm also going to address this more from the product standpoint than the IT ops standpoint, although the two can be interrelated as always. Um, in general, when you're small and scrappy, people are going to ask you to do 10 million things because they want you to be everything that they could possibly be. And in earlier stage startups, you cannot be everything for everybody. You just don't have the resources to do it. So you got to focus on your core abilities and promoting your core abilities. And unless there's somebody who's willing to pay a large amount of money for you to really divert or quote unquote pivot to do something else that's equally worthwhile, that also aligns with your business goals, you typically don't do it. That said, the kinds of things that we get from, say, school districts, teachers, district administrators are not that pivot inducing. Nobody's asked us to say, hey, could you stop what you're doing and build a math product instead, right? It's not, it's a slightly different, it, it's a different kind of discussion. That said, what we do to help drive what new things we do is to speak with our customers regularly. And I don't think that, I don't think you can replace that anyway. We are always listening to what our teachers have to say, what they need. And if enough teachers are saying that they need something, we build it. And that's the point at which we build it. And because we just integrated with Help Scout, actually, we have some unique insights now into what teachers are asking for help for, which are indicating what kinds of features we should be building or thinking about changing.
We're going to run out of time here, but I do want to make sure that we get your perspectives on the role of AI in the future of ITOps. So, question for both of you: how has the availability of kind of AI first technologies for ITOps changed how you think about the services that you can deliver, or about maybe the SLAs that you can hit, or maybe the human resources that you need?
I think for me, again, we're looking at, you've got so much data that you can now ingest. It's really, what do you do with that data? How do you script it? How do you automate it? How do you auto remediate? And it's not just, it's ops, it's compliance, it's a number of other, pieces and components. But we're a cloud only, right? Cloud first, cloud only. And we're moving quickly to AI ops first, and getting to the right pieces and components of information, and then critically analyzing, what does that mean? If I've got 25 database alerts that runs out of memory every night at 10 o'clock, does that mean I allocate more memory? Does it mean I rewrite my code? Does it mean I script something to go do those sorts of things? Or if, as we look at, to Mike's point, there's ops and then there's code, but the two are inextricably linked, as in your example, Mike, with the load balancing and RDS and the throughput. So the quick fix of, server runs out of memory, server runs out of disk space, doesn't really work anymore. You have to be able to analyze it across a broader spectrum. So I think many of the tools that are out and are coming out are going to enable us to look deeper and put that logic into the code and be able to vet that as we move towards a less ops kind of view, right?
I think that's a great way. That is a great way to put it. Less ops. So, as a CTO and co-founder, and my specialty and my background is in science education now, right? It is not the best. It is not necessarily the best use of my time to become an expert in IT operations. That's not my background. I've had to learn it because out of necessity, not because it was not intentionally. So I've learned much more in the past 6 months than I ever thought. At one point in my life, I couldn't configure a web server. At one point in my life, right, setting up, adding EC2 servers to my AWS architecture, right, was something I would never consider doing, right? And so it's out of necessity. And what I've been learning along the way, and what I've been hoping for, is something to help me do that faster and help me debug and figure out what I need to do faster. So for me, being aware of the problem is part of the challenge, right? Knowing is nice, but I also don't know how to solve the problems. And there's only so much Stack Overflow that you can do by yourself or with your team to solve the problem. And having something with some knowledge to automate that and tell me exactly what I should do or help me, that's the dream that I have, because that lets an innovator innovate. It frees them up from doing the work that keeps the lights on and doing the stuff that makes your company and your value proposition unique.
One last question before we get into the Q&A. Polish your crystal ball and tell the audience, in 3 to 5 years, what do you think the role of humans will be in ITOps? Sean alluded to a future of less ops. Some refer to a future of no ops. Is that feasible? You know, Mike, you talked about the importance of the human in the triage process, and would love for the group to get your perspectives on the ongoing role of the human. Is it changing in how we triage and manage ITOps?
I think NoOps is something that's nice to aspire for, right? Because it sort of implies a level of automation and standardization in how you develop and how you set up architectures, how you set up web-based software, and so forth. So I think the goal is, although lofty, it's a good goal to have. That said, I'm not entirely sure, and again, this is not my area of expertise, but it's more a matter of, I know now how many knobs there are to twiddle. I know what kinds of applications there are, and there are just so many different kinds that have different performance requirements across the board. It's a lot to ask to automate everything. It's a lot to ask to be intelligent about every possible combination. And plus, everybody's innovating all the time. Everybody is coming up with new, faster, better ways to do that, new languages, new whatnot have you, right? What is going to, is the speed at which we create new ways of doing things going to outpace the intelligence that we can create to automatically make those things work? I'm not sure, right? And if the AI outpaces that, we all might end up not needing jobs anymore, and we can just have the code innovate, have the AI innovate, be the innovators itself, and we can just sit back and watch and sip our Bacardi and rum.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I agree with you, right? No ops is a lofty goal and something we should aspire to. However, the ops role in and of itself is changing, right? The server jockeys of the past, that concept is not going to exist. The network jockeys of the past is not going to exist, right? Operations is now becoming code, and we need to implement true and tried and true traditional application development methodologies and approaches for running operations, remediations, responses to outages. And I think you're going to end up with, a handful of smart, critical thinking ops people, but they're going to take a problem and they're going to hand it back to the coders, and they're going to code their way out of a problem. I think it's going to be less ops, but I think as long as humans are writing code and humans are trying to hack code, you're going to end up with humans in ops. But I think it's less ops or less humans.
Good perspective. We've got a lot of questions came in during the discussion. Thank you to the audience for all the good questions. Let's see if we have time to get to one or two that I'm just going to cherry pick. And if we don't answer your question live, I'll make sure that we follow up with you afterward. So question for both of you. The question is from Anand. We are just evaluating how to use AI for automation. Where should we start, and how do we know if it's working?
At least from my perspective, you have to start with collecting telemetry data, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you need to figure out which tool, which platform you're going to collect telemetry data on, and what telemetry data you're going to collect from, right? So, how wide is your ecosystem? Do you have New Relic? Do you have AWS? Do you have Azure? Do you have network? Do you have logs? But as you start to gather that information, again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You gather the information, you pull it all together, and then you start to analyze the data and determine whether laying over your current outages over the data that you do have, should you have done something with that data? And if you should, how do you then script that and automate that process? Is it going to repeat? There's a diminishing point of return as you go to code this stuff. If the outage happens once a year and you know it's going to happen, it may not be worth the coding. But if it happens every day at 7 o'clock, it's probably worth the coding, right? But I would just start by gathering. That's, you've got to pick a platform and gather data. Mike?
Yeah, that's actually a really tough question in many ways. I guess I personally would start it as, what are you trying to solve, and have a real clear indicator of what needle you're hoping to move. Is it you want more server efficiency? Is it that you want to detect outages ahead of time and be able to prepare for an outage? Is it that you want to have some sort of automated failover strategy? Pick one thing and then try to see where you can go from there. I'm gonna agree with Sean very well. I'm gonna agree with Sean as well about the necessity of data. Without good data, no AI or no intelligent system is going to make any good decisions. So the cleanliness of the data is essential. So I would say that work towards standardizing what log files you have and what you're feeding into whatever intelligent system you have, and making sure that across your systems, they all are logging the same kinds of information, whether it be server logs, application logs, uh, performance indicators on your servers. So like CPU, memory, network in and out, 502 errors, 500 errors. That's a big one that I had to deal with, was the 500 errors. That was a lot of fun. Just things like that, something that you really care about wanting to try to solve. And I think, Dan at InsightFinder and their team really turned us on to this idea about, those key metrics that you want to try and move using intelligent ops.
Guys, great perspectives, great insights. Hope everyone in the audience learned as much as I did from Sean and from Mike. I'm going to wrap us up here. Like I said, if we didn't get to your question, I promise we'll follow up with you offline. In closing, I shared a quote that I think is relevant for all of us. What can be predicted is better left to machines. What requires intuition or empathy is better left to humans now and into the future. You've got our contact info there. If you're passionate about ITOps and the future of automation in ITOps like we are, I'd encourage you to connect with us. We love having conversations. We'd love to be part of your journey and understand more about your priorities. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, we're back on November 18th is our final panel discussion of the year. We would love to have you join us for that one as well. Last but not least, a final thank you to our great panelists, Sean from cloudEQ, Mike from Apprendis, and Inkits. Great to have you. Thanks for your insights. And thanks to everyone for joining us for today's discussion.